what this is, and then we can
Super.
have a chat about where the similarities are and where the differences are and whatnot.
Okay, yeah, please go.
Okay, so right. So background to the work we've been doing is that so we run the UK Access Management Federation, which is was the biggest R&E SAML federation in the world until Internet 2 decided to get bigger.
Okay.
So we're now the second largest. We've got like 2,000 entities, something like that, something along those lines. Actually, I can tell you exactly. As of yesterday, we have 1,104 members, 2,100 entities that we manage on the UK Federation. We pull in like another 2,000 from EduGain, so the interfederation thing which connects all of the R&E SAML federations around the world. How our customers have interacted with us in terms of registering new entities, modifying entities, and whatnot, up until now has always been manual. People email us and we do stuff for them. So we have a Git repository of individual entities with 12-year history, I think. Oh, it's Git now.
Right, of course.
It was SVN, and before that it was CVS, I think, and they've been imported into each other, so we've got the full history and whatnot. And yeah, if people want to do stuff, we go and manually tweak the XML for people, and then we've got processes which pull it all together, create the SAML aggregates, sign them, put them on the distribution servers and whatnot. So we're doing what lots of other places are doing at the moment, which is setting up a self-service portal to let people log in and manage stuff themselves. So a web interface to go manage your SAML entities.
Right.
Rather than pick up some existing software, there are a few other pieces of software which do this today, but they're usually quite tied to certain ways of doing things, like assuming you store all of your entities in a database. And we store ours as raw XML in Git. So we've gone and decided to build this self-service portal that works the way we do things, and rather than portal interacting directly with the back-end data, we wanted to abstract it somewhat. So we've separated them out completely. So there is a web front end which makes use of an API, and we've built the API which has an implementation which works with the Git backend. So the API we've built, the idea is that the main consumer of the API will be our web interface, but we could give direct access to the API for our membership, for those who have the technical ability to use it and enough need to use it. So for example, we might have some customers who only have 1 or 2 entities registered with us. They probably don't need to use the API. It's going to be more work for them to actually code up something against the API than it is to just go into the web interface and use it. On the other hand, we've got some customers who might have a couple of 100 entities with us. So for example, we have outsourced providers of SAML IDPs. So they run SAML IDPs on behalf of some of our membership, who make up maybe a quarter of all the entities or something. So they might have 400 or 500 entities. So they're prime candidates to give direct access to the API. To make changes in a programmatic way.
Wow, so one of your members basically has like a quarter of your entities. Or
basically, yeah. Yep.
Who is that, by the way?
EduServe. Company called EduServe. EduServ.
Okay. EduServe.
Yep.
Okay.
EduServe, yep. So the drivers for the API, as I said, our web interface to be able to manage back-end federation stuff in an abstracted way. Number 2, giving direct access to the API for some people. And number 3 is we are just setting up a number of services where we will manage infrastructure on behalf of our customers. So people pay us and we'll run their IDP for them. In our case, this is we can run a SAML IDP, an Eduroam IDP, a Moonshot IDP, and a library web proxy, like an easy proxy style thing. So it'll be a Shibboleth IDP, a FreeRadius server, and Apache doing some web proxying stuff. And in the future, you know, we could run some OIDC stuff for our customers. That then tunnels back to our customers' directories via a secure VPN for the actual authentication, because we're not a source of credentials. When a customer buys the service from us, you know,
I lost internet.
so this third use case of using the API is for our managed services when we instantiate them to register themselves on the Federation automatically.
Okay, I think I understand. I lost audio there for a second. So, but basically you're saying that if you're in your hosted product, it would make sense for you to automate the Federation management process because you're not going to go to the web front end to do it. You'd rather automate it.
Exactly. I mean, if we run the managed service and we run the Federation and we have APIs, why not use them?
Right.
So, yeah, spin up a VM in AWS and it sets itself up and registers itself on the Federation automatically.
Okay.
So that's kind of why we are doing this. What we have done is it's, I guess, like yours, the API itself is fairly generic. Our implementation of the API is very SAML specific.
Right.
But the idea is that there are essentially 3 APIs to use. So it's RESTful, level 3 RESTful with 3 APIs, one to manage entities, so add new entities, modify existing entities, delete entities. One is to manage membership, so add members, modify members, delete members. And one is for approvals. Approvals here being there are some things that we are happy for customers to self-assert, and there are some things that we need to check before we allow it. So, for example, in the world of SAML, we have entity IDs which might have domains in. There's a certain amount of trust around the domain name like thing in the entity ID, so we can't let Joe random user register something with Microsoft.com. So certain elements like domains in use and scopes in the SAML metadata, and in the SAML world as well, there are SAML entity attributes where you can tag entities with certain things, and some of those are mediated, like moderated rather than self-asserted, where we have to check somebody's allowed to assert it or not. So there are a certain amount of things that if an entity is registered with those elements, we have to go and approve them rather than it just being accepted automatically.
Sure.
A web front end could do this, but we've designed the API to do it because we want the front end to be stateless as much as possible. And also for people using the APIs directly, we want a way for them to be able to submit something, get an error back saying it needs approval, and then submit it to the approvals API so that we can then go and see it. So it's kind of abstracting the approvals onto the API stage as well.
Right. I probably posted this before. Is there a URL you have handy that documents the APIs?
So I posted that to the list. The current one, so this is still in development, is just at https://api.dev.ja.net. Sorry, api.dev.ja.net.
Can you just type it into the chat? There's a chat window.
Oh, where's the chat window gone?
It's if you
Your screen
expand.
is taking over my. uh,
It's in the go-to meeting
oh,
panel.
GoToMeeting window, control panel. Oh, control panel, got it there. Aha. Let me copy and paste it. There we go.
Okay.
Ignore the cert.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, we'll make. I'm just going to put that link in here.
Yep.
Here is the current docs. So let's should we take a look at it?
Yeah, if you want. So if you scroll down the bottom, first of all, the top just has kind of the processes by which the way you interact with it. So the bottom has the three APIs essentially,
Right.
and how you add, edit, remove stuff.
I see.
So what the members API does as an overview of what this is actually doing at the moment is, so it's RESTful, but what you're actually posting and getting is XML.
Right.
The membership of our federation is represented in a single XML file, and for each member there is some detail on their name, there's some detail on the approved items for them. So every domain that we've allowed them, that we've approved for their use is registered, every entity attribute, stuff like that. Also, members who own a domain can grant the use of that domain to other organizations. So, if you're buying something hosted from OCLC and you want to register an entity for Oxford University, but it's hosted under OCLC's domain, then OCLC can grant the use of that particular subdomain for that entity. And that's all stored in the XML behind the members API.
I see. That's interesting. So I'm just going to make a note. Certain members can grant use of subdomains.
Yeah, and the way we do that is there are actually two ways of doing that. You can grant the use of a specific subdomain for the use with a specific entity, or you can do a general grant to say Oxford University is allowed to use anything in Microsoft.com. So there aren't that many of those. It's mostly very specific grants for obvious reasons. But there are some.
And so you built your system around these APIs, has there been any adoption? Like, did you talk to EduServe and?
So we've only just built this. The API is up and running against the test repository. We're just in the middle of building the web interface for the second time. I'm not going into that.
Yeah.
That actually makes use of it. Over the next couple of months, we'll be rolling that out for us to test internally, because the idea is, first of all, our own internal staff will use it to manage stuff on behalf of customers, and then we'll let the customers use it. At that point, we'll also invite others to start using the API.
I see.
So no, it hasn't been used outside of us testing it yet. I said the initial users will be our own UI, probably EduServe. We've got another big thing within JISC where we're starting to set up a whole host of services for our own membership, which might entail several hundred SAML services. So they're an obvious candidate to use the API.
Right.
So a few bits and pieces.
So one thing that we've been struggling with in OTTO is defining the schema for various entities. And we'd be definitely interested. Did you just follow like the SAML metadata schema pretty closely, or did you define some other type of schema for the objects, for example, that get posted to this entity's endpoint?
So the entities endpoint, you actually post directly the SAML metadata. So it uses the SAML, well, not directly, it's wrapped in the CData tag. So there's a small um, bit of stuff you post, but it is just SAML metadata. So it has to, match, has to conform to the schema and whatnot.
I see.
You can post some stuff alongside it in the form of headers, like the person, the identifier for the user making the change, so you can record that for auditing purposes and whatnot. If you look at the put, for example, is it put on the entities?
Yeah.
For example, no, that's so the way we do changes, for example, is like not, you don't make a change to a bit of it. You get the entire thing, you make the change, and you post the entire thing back.
Right.
Because otherwise the API just gets so complicated.
Well, that's actually correct for put, I think.
Yeah.
It's a replacement. Patch is meant for sort of selectively replacing, and you're right, patch would drive you crazy, I think.
Exactly, so we decided not to do that.
One question, so this is a little like caveat of OpenID Connect is that SAML has entity ID.
Yep.
And in OpenID Connect, there's a natural entity ID for the IDP, basically the discovery URL, but there's no entity ID for the RP, and this makes it a little challenging. The closest thing you have is redirect URI. However, there can be several redirect URIs, and so there's no, that's sort of one of the things we've been struggling with, which is how do we reference the RP, and yeah, it's now why they didn't introduce an entity ID like identifier that's global across multiple OPs. I have no idea. It seems so obvious to me, but anyway, it's not there because when you think about it, when you an RP and you register it in OP, the OP returns your client ID, and so if you register at two OPs, you get two different client IDs. So anyway, so that's one of the that drove our design a little bit in a way because one of the things that we did was we introduced sort of a higher level above the federation operator called the registration authority. And the registration authority is sort of like a service provider that hosts the technical infrastructure for multiple federations. And the registration authority can issue an entity, an identifier that could be used in multiple OPs. So anyway, just thought, whenever I see this design where you have entity/entity ID, it always makes me think of this problem.
Yep. I mean, how we actually store the stuff in the back end is not actually by entity ID because, of course, in the world of SAML, entity IDs can change. So in the back end, in the Git repo, there's a separate XML file for every entity, and it's just a sequential number .xml that gets assigned automatically. Then the API is mapping from the entity ID to that internal number.
Right.
But that's a pure back-end thing. Obviously, you can't use that for anything else, really.
Did you look at Jagger, by the way? You must have heard of it there.
Yeah, I know Jagger.
And so in Jagger also has the idea that there's sort of a single, like, let's say, registration authority might host multiple federations. And I mean, do you see that as potentially a requirement where you might have to you might have multiple federations, or would they each just have their instance of these APIs?
It's a good question. I mean, this is why we've kind of taken this to the community at this point, is to see whether there's anything that can be common across APIs, if there's anything we can do that makes sense, if there's anything that we've missed. So, for example, introducing a federation level thing. As this stands at the moment, what sits behind the API is an instance of the Shibboleth metadata aggregator, which is a thing from the Shibboleth consortium that we use to manage our federation. And so, for example, the registration authority for all of the SAML entities in our federation, there's one, it's us. So this is single federation at the moment, and that gets recorded in each entity fragment. But for example, if somebody comes along and tries to update it so they put a different registration authority in, the API ignores that if it puts our one back in. So there's certain things we overwrite, no matter what people give us, that we are authoritative for, not the people using the API. But you could easily imagine extending this in a certain way, in some ways where, how could you do that? You could have a federation operator identified in the header with a request. So, you submit an entity and you say which federation it's part of, or you could have a federation API, I guess, or you could have API endpoints behind a prefix per federation. There's lots of different ways you could do this, isn't there?
Right. That's what we have. We have a federation API also. I have another question for you. So
Yep.
when we started OTTO, there was definitely the idea of supporting OAuth 2 was front and center. Like my basic idea was, if we're ever going to get OpenID adoption, we need multi-party federation capability. However, we looked at some of the other sort of experiences over the years, and so two of them sort of came to the top also. One of them was better searchability of the federation metadata, and the other one was perhaps a better design for interfederation, because it seemed like interfederation was creating some challenges around scaling, and was creating some duplication of data too. Like you have the data from Edugain and you sort of suck it into the in-common federation and filter it and process it, and but it seemed like that was creating, this didn't seem like the best design. But I guess on the first issue, now search, there's MDQ. We had Ian on a couple of months ago or weeks ago, I forgot. And he was saying, well, MDQ didn't really have great uptake. There just aren't that many like super compelling use cases for it. So I'm curious, did you build in, what did you think about building in the search capabilities, and do you see, is that something that you felt like you could do through these APIs?
Well, I mean, in terms of MDQ, so the UK Federation now has some production MDQ servers, and we're just slowly starting to get our customer base adopting them. So we've currently got about, looking at the thing now, 22 services using our MDQ servers. So that is starting to be adopted. It just so happens, it's a coincidence, honest, that the /entities doing a get on /entities/entity ID will return the same data just with some extra headers that MDQ does.
Right.
Actually, there are no headers. That's in the request. You can add headers in the request. Actually, it does respond differently because it responds with a collection, I think. I'll have to check. I can't remember the code. But it's quite similar. But this API, the API we've done here, is designed for the management stuff, not for actually distributing metadata as such.
Yeah. So in the entities, you do have a filter parameter, So you can filter can be all or org names.
Yeah, filter here is not filter as in filter on certain types of entities. It's filter what's returned. The point, what this is for is if you do a get on /entities, it returns all of the entities
Sure.
that the Federation operates, which is a 15 megabytes of XML. The web interface, if it wants to present a drop-down list of all entities, if you want to show a list of all entities, you don't want it to have to, on that when you load the page, you
Right.
don't want it to have to load 15 meg of XML. That's a bit ridiculous. So the filter there is to, at the moment, just to filter on org names, so that you can present a list of organization names. It makes the amount of data returned much
So
smaller.
it's driven by your requirements to present the interface to the particular Federation administrator at that institution.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
So there is also filtering, but a kind of implicit filtering based on. So when you interact with the API, so at the top of the page is a very, very simple thing about how authentication works through API at the moment. This is not something we've done a huge amount of work on
Uh-huh.
because our use cases are quite simple at the moment. At the moment, it basically just uses, so it's the second one down called authentication.
I see.
It just uses basic auth, and on the server end, we just make a set of APIs keys essentially, which is a username, password, base64 encoded.
Sure.
So clients present that as a basic authorization header.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, this is HTTPS only, and then the service maps that to an entry in its list of API keys that it's got, and each API key is then associated with one entity or is like a super user.
Right.
Super user can do anything and can view anything. Most people we give credentials to will be their own organization, which
Right.
means if you do a get to /entities and your API key only is associated with a specific organization, then
Right.
only the entities for that organization are returned.
Right.
So there's
So I,
explicit and implicit
I
filtering.
love hassling people on API security. So I'll
Yeah.
just hassle you for a second on this. You
Yep.
spend all this time making, 48 keys, but if you can guess the username, password, or the API key secret, what's the point of a 48 key if all you have to do is guess the username, password to replace it on replace the metadata on the management API? It totally undermines the security of your federation.
Yep. Absolutely. So this is just what we're doing at the moment.
But you can fix it
The
later. Um,
yeah,
yeah, my
and the
recommendation
idea
would
would
be to use,
yeah.
actually OAuth is probably not a bad choice, and use private key authentication. Um,
Yep.
so,
Absolutely. That's kind of on the roadmap already to replace this with something that's actually designed to do this kind of thing like OAuth. It's just for testing,
well, at least you put something in
works
there.
well enough.
Like Skim just leaves it totally undefined. So at least you're addressing the fact that you will actually put some security guidelines in here. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
but yeah, and I think it's interesting because I mean, what you're saying, a lot of Federation operators have built their own infrastructure to sort of manage, like Jagger. There's the
Yep.
Australian Federation registry product,
Yep.
and you're basically saying we're publishing. So a lot of these tools, I don't know that they publish APIs for their platforms. So
Um, yeah, no, I don't think they have because most of the time is actually not really APIs. It's just direct interface from the front end to a back end database or whatever.
right,
AAF have been building one privately, so I had a chat with those guys last year, and we were going to have a look to see what we can do about aligning things. I mean, one of the reasons I want to make this public is I would like to abstract from the front end from the back end, because at the moment, if you want to use Jagger, you have to store the data in the way that Jagger stores it. on the other hand, I don't want to build another front end, which means you have to use Git because we're one of the only ones who has a proper version control thing of entities. So what I want is this API abstraction. We decide on an API, then the front ends start using the API, and the back ends start using the API. So whether it's an API which sticks stuff in a database or sticks stuff in Git,
Right.
it means you could chop and change between. We've got a Git repo backend, but we want to switch our front end to something else.
Right.
If it uses the API properly, then you should be able to just switch bits and pieces in and out and still have them interoperate properly.
Right, and there should be some utility for especially service providers who maybe are serving multiple federations that they don't have to learn. They could, achieve some automation across, two federations with the same interface.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. One more question about the schema for organization.
Yep.
What schema did you use for this?
Oh, so this the schema for the backend data is the schema that we've been using for 10 years anyway. So this already existed for how we managed our membership. It just was not something exposed to users, if you see what I mean.
Okay.
So somewhere around here is the schema. Don't know if it's actually on this site or not.
Yeah.
If you...
Are the examples good though? Are they pretty close?
So I'm just having a look at now.
No.
Yeah, so if you'd like do a get on /members and then look at the response.
Right.
Oh yeah, you're looking at the get of a particular member with a response.
Yeah, I'm looking at your example. So this is pretty close. So you define this somewhere. And
yeah, we've got an XSD somewhere. It's probably on GitHub in fact, because so all of our tooling that we use, there's a private GitLab instance we have, and then we strip some of the more sensitive stuff and publish it all to GitHub.
Right. So in this data, basically you're capturing the date the organization joined, their name, what domains they're authorized. So here you said maybe that could be like blackpool6.oclc.com also, or edu.
Yep.
So maybe there could be an authorized subdomain from that's in somebody else's domain. What's this primary scope?
Ignore primary scope because we've actually just removed it. That's a bit of a legacy thing from about 6 or 7 years ago or something.
Okay. Ignored. Never mind.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm just finding let me load Eclipse so I can remember what the file name is. XSD.
This workflow stuff, the approvals, it seems somewhat implementation specific.
Well, I mean, approvals itself, the back end stuff is kind of implementation specific, but the idea that if you submit something and there are some things which need approval, then it can't get added. So what do? Add it to a queue of things which somebody will look at. Is quite generic. The actual implementation of how we interact with it, as in you submit to the entities API, you get an error back with what the error was. You submit to the approvals API, then admins get the approvals API when they approve something. You, for example, if it's a new domain, you get the organization from the members API, modify it to include the thing which has now been improved, and put it back, and then you can attempt to re-put the entity back on the entities API because it should now pass all the checks.
Right. So is the schema
process.
I'm sorry.
So the flow itself is
Yeah.
think, kind of a generic one. The
Yeah.
implementation is very specific, yeah.
Did you publish a schema for this approvals entities?
I don't think we have. We can.
Yeah.
Members docs.
Yeah. I mean, we found that publishing the API docs was easier than the schema docs. we
Yeah.
we sort of annotated the APIs as we went with Swagger, which is now called the Open
Yep.
API Initiative, I think. Um,
Yep.
and so we generated, but we've been stuck on the schema for some time, and it's been harder than we thought.
Hmm.
Although I think we're making progress now. I feel like we JSON LD, we're getting the hang of it. It was harder than we thought, but now I
Right.
think we're
I think
getting it.
the linked data structure and having all of the entities be major entities that stand alone sort of took some getting used to.
Yes, that's Judith Bush, by the way, from
Yep.
OCLT. Speaking of OCLT.
Yes.
It's a coincidence. Good thing I didn't say anything bad about you.
Yeah, would have been okay.
I just put our member schema in the chat window. Some of it is obviously quite a bit UK Federation specific, but not all of it is.
Well, this has been really helpful. Let me put this in the minutes. And I think that, you know, it's interesting when we got feedback from, you know, Leif Johansson from,
Yeah, I know Leif very well, yeah.
And so he was pushing back on us when we had him as a guest speaker, and he was very sort of negative about the Federation management schema that we published. We published some slides on it a couple months back, and Leif was extremely skeptical about his comment was sort of like, I want members to be able to publish this stuff as plain text files. And we didn't want Federation operators to have to implement any APIs. It's too complicated, and let the federations implement like however they want. So he was just really, really negative on the idea that that there would be standard APIs for, let's say, joining a federation or pushing your metadata. Or, my take on it is that the lack of these standards has basically led to a situation where the developers don't know what to do, a lot of them. Like if you give the developers a standard, it helps them make the software. So, yeah.
Yep. In terms, I kind of agree with what Leif says for some of the smaller federations. If you don't have that many members, that many entities, then you don't need an API. We're at the point where we need an API because we have so many members and so many entities. We need some standard way of doing things if we want to let people do it themselves, because we're trying, you know, as everyone is at the moment and has been for the last 10 years, trying to make everything more efficient, cheaper to run, easier to run, more effective. And, you know, the way to do that is to take us out as the middleman of doing things for our customers as much as possible, to let them do it themselves. You know, a range of options is the right answer here. You let some people, you know, you don't have to use the API if you don't want to. You can just ask us to do stuff for you. But giving an API for at least the heavier users of stuff, I kind of disagree a bit with Leif there. So when you get to the size of UK Federation or in common, and you've got, you know, in common you have organizations which have hundreds of service providers, I think. So I'm thinking like the system universities like UC California or whatever,
Right.
or University of California. they have development effort, they understand how to use APIs, they're doing lots and lots of manual stuff, even if they have a web interface to go and do it. So, the really simple example of a use case of why EduServe would want to do this in the UK is they do two sets of hosted services for our customers. One is an appliance you run yourself and they manage the software. The other one is a central service where it looks to the outside world like it's a couple of hundred entities, but all of those entities have the same cert, public keys and the same web service endpoints, because it is one piece of infrastructure in the back end. They needed to update that certificate on 300 entities.
Right.
They had to send us a spreadsheet of all of the entities, and we had to go and change this in all of the entity fragments manually. If they had an API where they could just programmatically say, get it, change the cert, post it, and bash script to do that, that would have saved us a lot of effort. And them a lot of effort as well, because we did this in batches. There's lots of email back and forth, double checking everything.
Right, just making some notes.
So yeah.
I'm going to say more accurate and less expensive.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good point. That maybe you want to make sure, well, you define the schema, so if you want to manually manage it, you can. But yeah, I think the APIs create some opportunities for more software, because it drives down the cost for software developers. So it's almost like if you're a federation and you'd say, here's what we need, then software developers can more easily go out and write the software. And like you said, for the federation operator and for the participants, more automation could save some time and money and increase the accuracy.
Yep.
So okay, we'll see. Well, our approach, I think we're within about 6 months of actually like getting OTTO to let's say the minimum viable product, first delivery phase.
Cool. Yep.
At which point we love your feedback, and anyone else at UK Access Federation who has can make some time to look at it. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of parallels to what you've done, and I think our approach is a little different, and I think it's a little more flexible. But whether that flexibility comes at too great of a cost is really the question we're wrestling with.
Yeah.
So, because I hear one of the things Ian pointed out was that it's just been so hard to get the participants to implement the technology, and so we're worried about the cost for technical and just time and effort to get it all running. So anyway, we're going to give it a shot, because we think I think that we need to change something to get to the next generation of digital services. SAML has been great, but new applications, especially non-server-side applications like JavaScript, browser-side applications which can't protect secrets, and mobile applications, that the requirements for today's apps have sort of exceeded the technical capabilities of SAML.
Yep.
So, and we're trying to figure out how can we keep this trust model and still support SAML too, because there's so much business built around SAML. It's almost like the Federation shouldn't really be technology specific anyway. It's a trust model. It's not shouldn't be so closely tied.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you there. Yeah. I mean, I long term, I would expect SAML not to be the answer. I would expect OIDC not to be the answer, because we keep learning new things, and the context in which they're being used keeps changing. But exactly as you say, the UK Federation for me is not about technology at all. The technology is how we currently deliver it, in this case SAML, but the actual core of the UK Federation is the set of organisations that have signed up to working together in a federated model.
And I
That's
think
what it's all about.
the changes of technology, the increase of getting services in the cloud and so on is going to push the need for the federations to be more valuable as time goes by. So
Yep.
Federation piece is, I think, going to keep getting important because pairwise, I mean, it's again the scaling issue.
I think that
Yep,
also the
absolutely.
services offered by the Federation might increase. So currently the Federation, one of the main goals is publishing this trust model, so publishing keys and information, trusted information. But we're seeing, maybe the Federation is in a good place to offer additional services. Like one of the services we have a pilot on is, could the Federation be used to issue badges to people? Like a badge could say, you have this degree at this university, or you've taken this training. And could it be more efficient for service providers to consume services like that are sort of cleared by the Federation, because the Federation sort of has a back channel trust to the members, the participants. So that's what I've been
Yep.
wondering.
Yeah, no, and I mean so we as JISC talk to Cabinet Office in the UK, which are the top level kind of civil servants. I don't know what the equivalent in the US would actually be. The Cabinet Office are the staff who stick around when the government gets voted out. It's they're the people who actually run everything, rather than the politicians. So we talk to them quite a lot about various bits and pieces. So we've been interacting with them about the UK's citizen space SAML federation that they're creating, for example, called GovUK Verify, and lots of other people. And just to give you an example, one of the people we're talking to at the moment are the Electoral Commission about how to make it easier for students to register for voting, because all of these students turn 18, they can vote. At that point, a lot of them have accounts in university back-end systems where the university has done quite a high level of assurance in terms of identity checking, and for various reasons, in part legislative reasons, part they pay fees, the students do, that kind of thing.
Right.
So we know to a pretty high degree who they are. So we're looking at whether we can leverage that information to help register them quicker and easier on the electoral roll so they can register to vote. So there's lots of stuff like that where we can provide value, exactly.
Yeah.
So the technology is, speaking as a technologist, my job title is Chief Technical Architect. I don't actually really care about the technology that much. I just want it to work.
Right.
We can make technology do whatever we want. What's much more interesting is what do we actually want it to do.
Albert North, the philosopher mathematician, said technology is when you actually don't have to do something. Or technological progress is when you don't have to do something. So yeah.
Yep.
Well, I don't know. Hopefully we'll get there one day. But all right, we're at the top of the hour, so I really appreciate your feedback, and I'll send you the minutes. And
Cool.
thank you for letting this be recorded. So I know Yanus, who's the co-chair, had a meeting conflict, I guess because our summer hours or our time is not working out right now. So
Yep.
I know he'll appreciate it. And yeah, and feel free to reach out if you need any more info or on OTTO or what we're doing. Feel free to just ping us at any time.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been meaning to get around to joining the list for a while, so I will do so and hang out and participate silently, if nothing else.
Sure. Yeah, there's anyone can join. You just have to sign the IPR, and
Yep.
yeah, and we don't send out that much spam. So it's like 1 or 2 emails a week, normally just the minutes and a couple other comments. So it won't overwhelm you. Not like refeds.
Yeah.
Okay. All
Okay.
right, Rhys. Well, thank you again. It was a pleasure.
Okay. No
Okay.
worries. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.